so that entire row was formed with right twists. All of these stitches slant to the left, so I know that that row was done with left twists. So I know that my next row needs to twist to the right. I would begin by selecting the first needle to the right of 0. When machine knitters refer to weaving, they're usually thinking of a fabric like this one, which is a knit-weave fabric where a supplementary yarn laces through the background stitches that are formed by the carriage. But when they're large enough, it's also possible to weave stitches through each other, forming a pattern in slip stitch and reverse slip stitch like this one. Whenever you want to combine knitted and woven stitches in the same swatch, you have to make sure that the woven stitches are large enough to work through each other without contracting the fabric. And I'm going to do this by using the bridging technique. Now all of the stitches in the row have knitted once. The ones here and here have knitted with a slightly larger stitch that will make them easier to weave through. And I'm going to leave them in holding position. The center 6 are part of the background, so they'll be allowed to knit again. But the other 2 groups are the ones where I'm going to accomplish the weaving, and they need to remain in holding position. And I'm going to knit 2 rows on those needles. The large floats provide the yarn that will actually be woven through the stitches that are still on the needles. I'm going to use a transfer tool to weave these floats through the stitches that were formed on those needles. I'm going to transfer the first and then every alternate stitch by lifting it off the needle, dropping the floats to the knit side of the fabric, and then replacing the stitch on the exact same needle. You may have to close the latch if it tends to catch on those floats. The remaining 3 floats need to be dropped off of the needles right onto the purl side. You don't need to move the stitch off the needle, just the floats. And now I'll do the same thing over on the right. Now I'll knit 2 more rows to create the floats that will weave next. Now when I weave these floats, I'm going to reverse their placement so that they lay in front of the stitches that the last floats were behind, and vice versa. Now, of course, I'll do the same thing over on the right, and then I'm going to knit 2 rows because, don't forget, these needles have been in holding position for 4 rows. They haven't knitted at all, and at some point they must be allowed to knit again. How often you allow the needles to knit will determine how much puckering you add to or eliminate from the fabric. It's all up to you and the kind of a look you're after. This woven stitch variation is called Chinese knot stitch, and it requires very large stitches that will be large enough to weave through each other. In this case, I've used bridging to hand knit these needles back to non-working position to create the largest stitches possible. I'm going to be using a double transfer tool and a latch tool together to do the actual weaving. The latch tool weaves behind and then in front of the first 2 stitches, grabs the 3rd stitch stitch in the hook, and when the needle pulls back through, the stitch is released and can be woven right through those 2 stitches. I'm going to move them over by 1 needle, replace this one on the first needle, and then the next 2 together. This is 1/2 of a Chinese knot stitch. I'm going to continue and do the same thing all over again, but I'm going to make sure that I pass the tool in front where it passed behind the first time. However, the purl side of the finished fabric is really not very interesting. All of the texture puckers up on the knit side and forms a texture that's quite effective for all over patterning or even for isolated segments. Popcorns have always been popular with knitters, whether they work by hand or machine, because they add a rich textural accent that can't be gotten by any other means. They combine well with other techniques like twisted stitches, or they can add interest to a basic cable design. There are 2 methods for producing popcorns. One uses a separate strand of yarn, and the other makes use of bridging with the carriage to control the individual stitches. The simplest method uses a separate strand of yarn to hand knit 2 needles. Generally, you'll want to put about 5 or 6 extra rows of stitches on this pair of needles to form extra rows that can be lifted and will pucker to the front surface of the fabric. I'm going to insert a tool into the very first row as if none of these other rows even happened. Just lift them right up onto the needles, and all of the extras will be pushed to the front. If I wanted to do another popcorn in the same row, I'd simply carry this yarn across the back and begin to knit on those 2 needles. But instead of a 2-needle popcorn, let's make a 3-needle instead, and I'll show you how to borrow some needles to get the wider width. I'm going to remove this stitch to its adjacent needle on the right, and this one to a needle on its left, and leave the stitch on the middle needle of the 3. So this stitch and 2 empties. I'm going to hand knit the central needle, wrap around the adjacent needle, and knit my way back across. Now I've got stitches on all 3 needles, and I can knit, let's say, an additional 2 or 3 rows across these needles. You really don't have to worry that every one of these stitches are the same size, because by the time the popcorn is lifted and forms a little round ball, you won't notice whether each of them was the same or not. Now I want to narrow the top of the popcorn by transferring these stitches back to the center needle, and reducing it down to 1 stitch by knitting the yarn through. I'll pick up the first row of the popcorn, and I can do it with a transfer tool instead of that pointed unicorn. Hang it on here, and then I'm going to return the stitches to the needles that I borrowed. I'm just lifting them up and moving them back over. This method is a lot slower because the stitches have to be removed and then returned to their needles. As fast and easy as this method is, the major drawback is there's always a float or yarn tails on the back side of the fabric that renders the purl side unusable for a garment. So if you want to be able to place popcorns on the purl side, or to have the purl side a little bit more presentable, we could use the continuous method instead. First, I'll set the carriage to hold needles in holding position, and then I'll remove some of the stitches on a stitch holder. In this case, the stitch holder I'm using is actually a hand knitting needle. It's a convenient stitch holder because I can remove or replace stitches from either end. And because I want to make a giant 5-stitch popcorn, I'll remove 4 stitches from their needle every place I want one. And I'll show you how I get these stitches off, like so. And then when the needles return, stitches have been deposited on the holder. And at the same time, I'll remove 4 stitches for the next popcorn, so I don't need to interrupt my knitting halfway through to repeat this. Clearly, the wider you're knitting, the longer your stitch holder needs to be. And I usually just tuck the ends right down into the knitted fabric so they don't get caught up in the carriage or get in my way at all. Initially, I just want to knit these stitches that form the bridge over on the right, so I'll place all of the other needles to the left in a hold. I don't need to worry about the empty needles. They can stay back in non-working position. And I'll knit 1 row from the right to the left, and then wrap the empty needles so that they are in fact casting on again. Bring them back into an upper working position where they can continue knitting. Then I'll move all the bridge needles on the right into holding position, except for the very first one. That needle will knit with the other 4 stitches to form the 5-stitch popcorn. Now I'll knit 3 rows across these 5 needles before I reduce the shape of the popcorn. You may want to keep a little bit of tension with your fingers underneath and keep an eye that each stitch knits properly. Once you've knitted 3 rows across these 5 needles, you can use an eyelet transfer tool to reduce the popcorn to 3 stitches. Knit 1 row, and then the 3 of these can all be placed on a single needle. And in fact, you can hand knit that needle to reduce down to 1 stitch. Now, ideally, I'd like this single stitch to end up over here on the right, so I'm going to move it. It's right back where I had a single stitch to begin with before I cast on. And then I'm going to pick up the first row in 2 locations, over here on the right and on the left corner as well. That'll keep the popcorn from flopping around loosely on the bed of the machine. Then I'm going to knit 1 row to get my carriage back here to the right. Push the popcorn to the front of the fabric and fill those empty 4 needles with the stitches that were originally on them. Incidentally, this is the same way you'd hang hand-knit ribbing on the needles of the machine. Now, I want to knit across this bridge and this one up to the point where the next popcorn will be placed. So I've put these needles into upper working position. These are still in working position. And I'll knit 1 row to the left and begin the sequence all over again by casting on to the 4 empty needles. Now that the popcorn's been rehung, I can return these stitches to their original needles and finish knitting the rest of the row. You'll notice when I'm done with this portion of it that there are no floats from one popcorn to the next, so the purl side of the fabric is quite acceptable. And if I had chosen to, I could have left the 5-stitch popcorn on the purl side of the fabric. I'll return the needles on the left to upper working position where they can resume knitting and finish out the row. There, let's take a look at them and see what we've got. This is a 2-stitch popcorn, and this one is a 3-stitch popcorn. And I think if you compare the two as you look at them side by side, you'll see that the 3-stitch is a lot rounder and seems to stand out better from the surface. But I still question in most situations if it's worth the time and the extra effort that the 3-stitch version takes. I'll leave that decision up to you. The 5-stitch popcorn is definitely much larger and stands out much further from the fabric. I know you'll find lots of interesting ways to use these popcorns alone and in combination with other techniques. The fish scale texture on the yoke of this sweater was produced by removing stitches on a holder, casting onto empty needles, using short row shaping, and replacing those stitches on their original needles. I'm going to remove groups of 5 stitches on a stitch holder and leave 3 stitches on the needles in between. Then I'll go ahead and do the shaping. Let me show you how. I'm going to be doing 3 fish scales. I've removed the stitches for the first 2, and now I'll remove the last group of 5. I'm doing 5s because that's what I did in the sweater I'm wearing, but you could make these fish scales as large as you want, simply by removing more stitches. Now, I'm going to set the carriage to hold needles in holding position. First, I'll hold all needles to the left of the first fish scale, and then knit across from right to left across the bridge and that empty space. Now, before I remove the carriage and back it up to the other side, I'm going to cast on to the empty needles. And put them in a position where they can knit, and then hold the bridge to the right. These are the only 5 needles that we'll be knitting throughout. Now, you may need to do some pinching and pulling down to provide some tension. Just keep an eye on all of those stitches. Before I knit back, I'm going to put the first 2 needles on the left of the group into holding position and knit, and then the first 2 needles on the right of the group into holding position. Before I knit back, I'll move 1 needle on the carriage side into upper working position where it can resume knitting, and I'll do that every row, like this. Return the needle and knit. Return a needle and knit. When you're ready to return the 5th and last needle, you'll return it to upper working position as well as the bridge group to its left. The last row of this fish scale will knit across this bridge and put the carriage beyond the next group where I can cast on and continue. However, before I continue on the left, I want to drop this flap through to the right side of the fabric and rehang the stitches that were originally on the needles. This is an important point because whenever you want an effect to appear on the knit side of the fabric, the rule is that the stitches that are on the needles first are the ones that will show on the knit face of the fabric. So because these stitches are there first, the original stitches will be behind them rather than on the front. Now these needles can be placed in hold, and I'll move over to the next group of empty needles to the left. Now I'll cast on to the next group of 5. Put them into a position where they can knit and knit 1 row across all of them. Now I'll start holding. The last needle is replaced, the next bridge, and another fish scale is completed. Push it to the front and replace the stitches on their original needles. Now I'll put the fish scale needles and the bridge needles to their left into holding position so I can finish up the last group. Very often when you take a fabric like this off the machine, you'll notice that the texture tends to curl upwards. Usually that'll flatten out and lie correctly after the fabric's been steamed or blocked. There are 3 stitches between each of these fish scales. Only 1 between the scales on this example, so the texture is much more concentrated. There's also just 2 rows between each row of texture here, and you can vary that according to your likes. You may also want to vary the edges of each fish scale by using a separate strand of yarn in a different color or texture to accent the tips. It's an interesting texture, and I think you'll find lots of ways to make use of it with just a little imagination. Transferring stitches can produce a variety of effects like lace stitches, embossed and debossed double bed fabrics, but they can also produce fabrics like these where the stitches lie at an angle to the rest of the stitches in the fabric, as they do in this raglan or in this V-neck edge. You can also move stitches diagonally within the body of a fabric, as I've done here and here, but that takes a little bit more planning. So let me start with the simplest applications first and show you a raglan and a V-neck treatment. You probably recognize this as a full fashion decrease, except instead of the usual 3-pronged tool, I'm using a 6-pronged tool that enables me to move more stitches at the same time and create a much stronger effect than I could with the 3-stitch tool. The 3-stitch transfer creates a very narrow effect close to the edge of the fabric, and it really isn't too usable for diagonal moves. However, when I start moving as many as 6 stitches at once, it gives me a field of 5 diagonal stitches before the 6th or doubled stitch along the decrease line. And in this area, I can create cables, popcorns, lace effects, any of the other hand-manipulated stitches, and they'll lie at a definite diagonal to the rest of the stitches in the cloth. Also, remember that anything you do to these stitches will lie at an angle to the fabric. For example, if you drop a stitch and latch it up, that stitch will be reversed as a knit stitch against purl, and it will lie at an angle. So if you want to accent a cable with reformed stitches, you can count on them being at an angle to the rest of the fabric. Let me show you how I'd allow for this in planning a cable design. With a cable like this, not only do I have 4 stitches forming the cable, I've got a latched up purl stitch on each side of that, making 6 stitches, 2 more on this edge, one of which will be absorbed in the seam line, and 2 more on the left side. One is hidden in the decreasing so that I end up with 1 whole stitch. It adds up to a total of 10 stitches. To do this, I'm going to use this 12-prong tool, but I'm only going to use the 10 prongs over on the right. I'll never remove stitches with the 2 on the left. And I'll handle it exactly as I would any other transfer tool, except you'll find that the more stitches you're moving, the greater the chances are you're going to split stitches or that they won't clear the latches. So I very often close all of the latches first to make sure that I do have them where I need them. Lift and shift over 1 stitch to the right. In this case, the 10th stitch is doubled up on the next needle that already holds a stitch, but the others are just shifted in by 1 needle, and there'll only be 1 stitch on each of them. Now, because we're doing a raglan shaping, you'll knit 2 rows and then make the next decrease, just as you would if you were shifting 3 stitches at a time. This is pretty standard. Occasionally you'll get an atypical raglan that decreases more or less often. But more likely than not, you'll be decreasing every 2 rows. take this off and we'll get a look at it. Clearly the 10-stitch tool has given us a much wider group of stitches to work with. We have from here to the edge of the fabric to shape cables and latch up stitches and do whatever we want for a sweater design. The truth of the matter is, when we talk about diagonal cables, we're actually talking about cables that are formed on stitches that lie at an angle to the fabric. I've been treating this like a typical raglan, decreasing every 2 rows. But a V-neck might require that I decrease every 4 rows. In either case, whether I'm doing a raglan or a V-neck, I need to keep track of the cable crossings separately because they don't necessarily coordinate with the decrease rows. In fact, if there's ever a row when you need to decrease and cross a cable at the same time, make sure you do the decrease first and then cross the cable. It'd be very difficult to move a whole group of stitches where some of them had already been crossed. Whether you're working with V-neck or raglan edges, the wide diagonal transfers are handled basically the same way. But if you want to make diagonal moves within the body of a garment, there's one major difference. Let's take a look at that sweater I showed you earlier and see what that difference is. Both the cables and the popcorns on this sweater lie on diagonal stitches. And if I had formed those diagonal stitches the same way I did on the V-neck or the raglan, I'd end up with a very, very narrow sweater. So what I need to do whenever I make a decrease, as I have here, is to pair it with an increase on the opposite side, so that as I shift these groups of stitches across the face of the knitting, I'm increasing and decreasing every time. Decrease on one side, paired increase on the other. With this much going on, the only way to be sure you can keep track of everything is to draw it out on a chart and let each square on a piece of graph paper equal 1 stitch or 1 row. Then when you look at the chart, you can tell exactly where each decrease and increase should be placed and exactly which stitches are going where. Let me show you how that works on the machine. When you look at the fabric from the back side, it's easy to see the decrease line formed along the right edge of this group of stitches. You can see each of the doubled up stitches. On the left, I've allowed the empty needles to remain in working position after I've transferred the stitches, so it's formed a row of eyelets along this edge. The eyelets constitute an increase because the needle is allowed to knit again. You can leave the eyelets if you have a use for the eyelets, otherwise they'll just look like a row of holes in the design. And you may prefer to make increases along that edge instead. The eyelets are simple to eliminate. First, make the decrease, shifting the stitches over by 1 needle, and then lift the purl bar from this last stitch onto the empty needle, and then knit the 2 rows. Just as I can improve the increased edge by closing up the eyelet, I can also improve on the decreased edge of the fabric. Let's compare these 2 diagonals. This one is exactly the way I've been working on the machine, where the edge stitch is more or less lost in the decreasing, and it's sort of a fuzzy edge to the diagonal. This one produces a much, much sharper line and retains the full width of the stitch group that's been transferred. It requires 1 extra step, and whether or not you'd want to use this would depend on the yarn you're working with. If I were working with a very smooth yarn where every detail showed, I'd opt for this. If I were working with a fuzzy yarn, a mohair for example, that effect would be lost, and this would be more than fine to work with. When you shift a group of stitches, the first stitch on this side of the tool is the leading stitch in that group. And each time I make a decrease, as I did it before, that lead stitch goes to the back of the fabric. It lies behind a stitch that's already on the needle. And because the stitch that's on a needle first is the one that shows on the face of the fabric, What we want to do is make sure that this stitch is always the first one on the leading needle. And to do that, what I'll do is transfer this stitch first so that it lies behind the lead stitch. Then move the entire group over and fill up the eyelet as I would have before. We're adding an additional step over on the right, but it's going to retain the exact same stitch on the face of the fabric each time. Let me knit 2 rows and then show you exactly where the next decrease would go. First I'll make the decrease by removing this stitch and placing it on the lead needle. Then I'll move all 6 stitches over to the right and fill up the eyelet on the left side of the group. The method is basically the same, whether you're improving the decreased edge or whether or not you're picking up the eyelet on the left side. When you're working single bed, it will always be the same kind of a lateral shift. However, on a double bed machine, you have the added attraction of being able to isolate knit stitches against a purl background. The main body of the stitches are located on the knitter or the main bed of the machine, and the stitches that will be shifted, in this case to form a cable,
자, 미국 사람이 한 것 같은데, 아주 촬영을 잘한 것 같다. 뭐, 고화질로 아주 촬영을 잘한 것 같은데, 우리도 아마 저런 형식으로 촬영을 많이 하게 될 거야. 그래서 이제 기초적인 부분들하고 또, 지금 저거 같은 경우는 그 무늬를 직접 이제 수작업으로 다 만드는 건데, 필요하면은 그 무늬 만드는 방법이나 이런 것들도 이제 같이 연구해서 패턴 같은 것도 만들어 보고 하자. 원래 수요일날 방송을 해야 되는데 수요일날 캠이 고장 나가지고 방송을 못했다. 그래서 오늘 이제 보충 방송으로 하는데, 그래서 오늘은 시간을 11시까지만 하는 걸로 좀 채우고 마무리를 할게. 내일이 또 이제 본래 하는 방송 날이니까 내일 마저 좀 보자. 일단 그 아프리카 TV 로고로 이렇게 미니 쿠션을 만들어 봤다. 이거는 로고 자체를 만드는 거고, 요거는 이제 로고가 들어간 이제 미니 쿠션 만드는 거다. 아주 감촉도 좋고 좋다. 만들기는 이게 훨씬 더 쉽다. 얘보다는. 얘는 훨씬 더 어렵다. 바탕 흰 바탕화면에 이렇게 넣는 거는 좀 쉬운데 얘는 만들기가 좀 더 어렵다. 근데 아프리카 방송에서 이렇게 인형을 만드는 건 괜찮대. 근데 이 인형을 판매하거나 하면 안 된다고 하니까 뭐 내가 판매하려고 이거 만드는 건 아니고 아프리카 로고를 그 편물기로 인형으로 만들어낼 때 쿠션으로 만들 때 이렇게 만든다는 걸 보여주기 위해서 한 거니까 아프리카 TV에서 용서해 준단다. 로고 이용해서 이렇게 인형 만들어도 된단다. 여러분들도 내가 이거 도안 같은 걸 좀 나중에 또 올려줄 테니까 여러분들도 이 아프리카 TV 로고를 이렇게 만들어서 이쁘게 집에다 놔둬봐라. 괜찮지 않나? 그지? 그래서 오늘 방송은 여기서 좀 종료를 하고 내일 아프리카 TV 로고를 어떻게 만들었는지 그 과정을 한번 살펴보도록 하자. 그리고 이게 보니까 뭐 방송하는데 필요한 뭐 부대 여건들이 참 많다. 그래서 그걸 좀 다 숙지하는 데는 아무래도 방송 한 두세 번 지나가면서 좀 숙지를 해야 될 것 같다. 공부를 많이 해야 돼. 그러고 뭐 페이스북 올리지 뭐 인스타그램 또 뭐 어디야. 그러고 이제 내가 영상 편집 같은 것도 잘 할 줄은 모르는데 뭐 최대한 배워서 좀 편집할 건 해서 가급적이면은 그 아프리카 방송 내에는 보니까 이게 한 3일 정도 보관이 되는 것 같아. 그래서 이제 그동안 했던 방송들을 좀 편집을 해서 가급적이면 유튜브나 또는 그 블로그에다가 블로그하고 지금 그 쇼핑몰은 만들고 있는 중인데 블로그는 아마 좀 빨리 만들 수 있을 것 같고 간단하게라도 시작하면 되니까. 근데 이제 그 쇼핑몰은 무슨 결제나 뭐 이런 것들 다 연동이 돼서 돌아가야 되기 때문에 그건 조금 시간이 걸릴 거다. 그럼 뭐 사진 찍어서 다 또 뭐 편집해서 올려야 되니까 시간이 좀 걸릴 거고 우선 그 개인적으로 좀 이야기하고 싶은 거는 그 쪽지로 문의를 하거나 그렇지 않으면은 블로그에다가 이제 글 같은 걸 좀 남겨두면 좋겠다 친구들아. 이제 가급적이면은 또 영상은 블로그와 주로 거기에다 좀 많이 만들어 놓을게. 그리고 이제 그 시즌 1 동안에는 별도로 방송 편성표를 그 만들지는 않겠지만은 이제 시즌 2부터는 매번 방송 편성표를 만들 거다. 이제 그거 참고해 가지고 같이 하고 싶을 때 같이 이렇게 만들어 보면 된다. 아까 그 미국 여자분 그 참 그 편물기로는 거의 뭐 고수급인 것 같다. 잘 한다 보니까 패턴을 만들어 가는 그 과정이 굉장히 좀 고수다운 모습이 보이는 것 같다. 나도 1년 정도 지나면 저 정도는 할 수 있겠지 뭐. 그지? 여기 포천인데 비 온다. 다른 데는 비가 오는지 모르겠는데 원래 새벽 3시부터 비 온다 했는데 벌써부터 비가 오네. 마지막 장마비인 것 같은데 이제 장마 끝나고 나면 전부 다 휴가 간다고들 난릴 거 아니야. 포천으로 놀러 와라. 포천으로. 그래야지 파파곰 좀 만나고 가라. 내가 시원한 냉커피는 대접할게. 하... 오늘 뭐 좀 보여줄 게 있을까 해가지고 내가 지금 아까부터 인스타그램을 되게 많이 뒤져보는데 마땅히 뭐 인스타그램이 뭐 재미있을 만한 게 별로 없네. 그래도 몇 개 정도는 좀 더 봐볼까? 이 사람 아주 조그마한 아주 뭐 완전히 조그마한 미니 인형 만드는 사람인가 본데. 오, 코스가 장난이 아니야, 그지? 거의 뭐 코바늘 뜨개의 달인인 것 같은데, 이 사람은 나 여러 번 본 적 있다. 인스타그램이 내 친구기 때문에 이 사람은 거의 주로 뭐 아주 진짜 작은 인형, 그런 인형들 만드는 전문가다. 아주 대단하다. 얘봐. 연필 위에 거북이야, 이게, 거북이. 연필 위에 거북이, 이렇게 작은 인형을, 야, 참, 세상에는 희한한 사람들 많지. 이런 걸 이렇게 해가지고 팔까? 이 친구도 거의 뭐, 인형으로는 거의 달인이라고 봐야 되겠다. 이렇게 작은 인형을 만드네. 이거 무당벌레다, 무당벌레. 이야, 이런 인형들 바닥에 떨어뜨리면 찾지도 못하겠다, 너무 작아서. 세상에는 상상치도 못하는 사람들이 참 많아. 작은데도 웬만한 표현을 다 해내는 거 보면은 이 감각이 굉장히 뛰어난 사람인 것 같아. 동영상도 잘 만들었네. 참 희한한 사람이다, 이 사람도. 정말 멋지다. 음. 근데 요런 거는 이제 코바늘 뜨게 하고 이런 거 가지고 만드는 게 많이 있고, 보통 이제 일반 사람들은 코바늘 뜨기를 많이 하거든. 잘 하거든. 그래서 아마 우리나라에도 이런 좀 재능이 있을 만한 사람이 충분히 있지 않을까, 이런 생각을 하는데, 또 그런 사람들을 한번 찾아보자, 주변에. 참 진기하기 짝이 없다. 참, 이거 내가 화면을 한번 줄여볼 테니까 같이 한번 봐보자. 야, 이거 뭐 가능한 일이니? 정말 작게 만들었다. 그런데도 봐봐. 이게 인형의 모습이나 이런 게 전부 다 표현이 되는 거 봐. 야, 참 대단하다는 말밖에 할 말이 없다. 1번 친구인데 참 잘 만들었다, 그지? 편물기로는 이렇게 만들지는 못한다. 이런 거는 이제 코바늘 되게 잘하는 사람들이, 그 뭐 필요하면 또 코바늘 되게 잘하시는 분이 있으면 초대해서 같이 이야기도 나눠보고, 직접 코바늘 뜨개로 이런 거 만드는 것도 한번 보고. 나는 코바늘 뜨개는 잘할 자신이 없다. 워낙 고수들이 많기 때문에. 이제 또 다른 그 있는지 한번 또 보자. 이 사람이 뭐 수노다, 가슈토시 수노다, 가슈토시 수노다, 수노다, 가슈토시 수노다. 아미구루미라는 말이 무슨 말이지? 아미구루미 아티스트. 아미구루미가 뭐 조금 작은 뭐 이런 뜻인가? 일곱 말을 할 줄 알아야지. 아미구루미 아티스트. 근데 인스타그램은 보기보다 좀 불편한 게 많아. 이게 뭐 밖에 나가려면 어떻게 나가는지도 잘 모르겠다. 그리고 뭐지? 사진 같은 것도 좀 확대해서 보고 싶을 때가 있는데 그런 것도 잘 못 보고. 간단하게 사진 올리고 그냥 사진 자체만 보고 뭐 그런 거라서 그런지 그래 뭐 좀 불편한 점이 있네 인스타그램은. 또좀 보자. 우리가 앞으로 좀 만들어 보려고 하는 암 암워머 뭐 레거워머 다리에 차는 거 뭐 그런 거 종류인 것 같은데 뭐 간단한 이런 패턴부터 해서 중간에 또 뭐 그림 문양 같은 것도 좀 넣어보고 그렇게 하자. 음, 음. 이건 니트 옷 짠 건가 본데, 니트 옷을 짠 건가 본데, 또 뭐 그런 대로 좀 특이한 거라서 한번 봤다. 음, 우리가 나중에 이런 애기옷 같은 경우는 애기옷까지는 해볼 거다. 애기옷까지는 해볼 건데, 성인들 옷도 뭐 간단한 것들은 좀 해볼 건데, 복잡한 것들은 못 할 거고, 성인들 옷은 또 기법이나 종류가 굉장히 많기 때문에 다 섭렵이 될는지 모르겠다. 그건 이제 1년 지나고 나서 그래도 여러분들이 방송을 사랑해주고 많이 이제 찾아와주고 하면 저런 것들 성인들 옷도 좀 만들어보고 그러자. 여기도 인형 만드는 것 같은데 한번 보자. 무슨 인형들이 있는지. 민트버니하고는 조금 다른 느낌의 그런 인형이긴 한데, 좀, 여기도 인형을 참 특이하게 잘 만드는 것 같다. 중국 사람인가? 그 중국 사람 같은 느낌이 든다. 어, 중국 사람들도 보면 이런 거 잘 만드는 사람들이 많아. 의외로 중국이 그래도 한때는 문화로서는 강대국이었잖아. 이건 중국 사람이 만든 것 같다. 각 나라마다 인형을 잘 만드는 사람들이 많네. 중국인 것 같다, 중국. 멋지네. 이- 내가 노트를 하나 사가지고 좀 특이하게 인형 잘 만드는 사람들 있으면 좀 이름을 따로따로 좀 적어서 수시로 이 친구들 작품 한 것도 좀 보여주고 그렇게 할게. 자, 그래서 수요일날 못한 방송 오늘 어, 대신해서 이제 금요일날 조금 시간을 내서 해봤는데 오늘은 새로 캠 고쳐놓은 거 잘 작동되는지 좀 확인을 잘 해봤고 이제 크게 문제가 없는 것 같고 필요하다면 내가 캠을 하나 더 구해서 비상 사태가 발생됐을 때 꼭 비상 컴퓨터가 옆에 한 대 더 있게끔 만들어 놓을게. 컴퓨터는 만들어 놨는데 아직 캠은 구입을 못해서 캠 하나 더 구입해 가지고 만들어 놓을게. 어쨌든 아프리카 방송에서 이런 인형을 이렇게 만들거나 하는 거는 뭐 크게 문제 삼지 않겠다고 하니까 우리 친구들도 내가 도안 올리면 같이 한번 만들어 보자. 내일도 또 방송을 해야 되거든, 토요일이라서. 그래서 내일은 좀 이제 본 방송이니까 낮에 촬영했던 그 자료나 이런 것들 가지고 또 이제 기초적인 부분들 공부해 보면서 아프리카 TV 로고를 가지고 쿠션을 어떻게 만들었는지 그 과정을 또 한번 보자. 그리고 내일 방송 마치고 나면 일요일날 내가 좀 이제 시간을 내서 유튜브하고 이제 유튜브하고 파파니트 방송 아프리카 방송 홈페이지 메인 페이지에다가 이제 영상 같은 것도 좀 편집해서 올리고 또 사진 같은 것도 좀 올리고 그렇게 해볼게. 또 아프리카 TV 로고 인형 그 쿠션 만드는 인형 쿠션 만드는 거 이거 이제 사진도 좀 깨끗하게 찍어서 사진 자료도 좀 올려놔 볼게. 여기 포천인데 여기는 경기도 포천인데 비가 조금씩 온다. 여러분들 사는 동네는 어떤지 모르겠다. 마지막으로 노래 하나 들으면서 금요일날 원래 수요일날 못했던 방송 금요일날 대신했는데 이걸로서 오늘 방송을 마치도록 하겠다. 그래서 11시 이제 2시간 정도 했는데 미국 그 편물 리터가 이렇게 그 수작업으로서 패턴 만드는 거를 쭉 좀 봤고, 또 앞전에 그 민트버니 같이 좀 인형을 잘 재밌게 만드는 친구, 또 뭐 아까 일본 친구, 또 지금 민트버니 같이 만들었던 좀 전에 마지막으로 봤던 그 사진들은 아마 중국 친구인 것 같다. 내가 알기로는 뭐 인도나 또 기타 뭐 필리핀, 인도네시아, 또 베트남 이런 쪽 동남아에 있는 친구들도 인형 같은 거 잘 만드는 친구들이 많은 걸로 알고 있다. 뭐 내가 기회가 되면 계속 인스타그램으로 또 페이스북으로 자꾸 친구 맺어가지고 그런 친구들도 좀 소개를 해보도록 할게. 물론 러시아도 많다. 자, 마지막으로 이상은의 함다디라는 노래를 들으면서 좀 비도 오고 날씨도 꿀꿀하고 해서 조금 재밌는 노래 하나 선택해봤다. 내일 저녁 때 9시에 다시 만나자 친구들아.